Well, joyful scenes there, but really tense today as the England and Welsh FAs still discover if they can wear these OneLove armbands. FIFA wanting teams to wear Football Unites the World armbands, but doesn't feel very unified here today. But there are still fans wanting to come to this World Cup, first in the Middle East, and we are here in the ticket queue this morning. People trying to get last-minute tickets. The first game of the day is Netherlands against Senegal, and I've got a fan with me now, Romeo. So, you still hoping to get to the stadium in time?
Yeah, I hope so. I'm waiting for like 2 hours now, but who knows if I'm going to be in today.
Now, the Netherlands manager, Louis van Gaal, formerly of Manchester United, he's been really critical of this World Cup being in Qatar. Did you have some reservations about even coming here?
Yeah, I considered coming here because, I just like football, you know. Not because of the whole story, because I like what they did here in Qatar. Because, we heard about it, but I'm just here for the football.
Now, Virgil van Dijk, your captain, could be booked today if he wears the OneLove armband, which has been talked about. This seems like a bit of a mess. How have you seen this unfold?
It is a mess. Virgil announced like 1 month ago that he wants to wear the OneLove band. And we heard yesterday that the FIFA abandoned the band. So I don't know what he's going to do today. I'm curious.
Well, good luck getting your ticket.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. Well, you see there just a sense of the concern about some of the issues here in Qatar, human rights concerns about women's rights here in Doha as well. Just a real indication of the controversy shrouding this tournament. Yet there are still fans here trying to find their way into the first full match day. We've got 3 games today, starting with the Netherlands against Senegal, then it's England against Iran, and we finish up with Wales against the United States.
And Rob, I think I'm seeing an Argentinian shirt amongst those. Let's hope that we don't get drawn against Argentina at any stage, because we know what happens when that happens. Although they didn't do too well, I think, in the last World Cup, did they? What's the mood? I know that you've been amongst the England team and the Wales team. How are they feeling?
Well, they really have to balance out this activism and focusing on the mission at hand. For Wales, it's a huge moment. They're playing their first World Cup match since 1958. It's a significant occasion for someone like Gareth Bale, who's achieved so much in the game at club level. And then for England, it was only, a year or so ago, reaching the Euros final, missing out so agonisingly on penalties to Italy. The semi-finals Gareth Southgate took England to in 2018. So expectations are so high. And the question is, can England deliver? Will this be Gareth Southgate's last tournament after 6 years in charge? There are so many big footballing matters on the pitch, yet at the same time, players and, as we've heard, fans having to grapple with all the moral issues just about being here in the Middle East in Qatar.
OK, just tell us again what those fans are queuing for.
Well, this is the ticket queue, so not all the tickets have been sold out for matches. It is quite difficult to get here. Well, it's about a 6-hour flight from Europe, pretty costly as well. Accommodation has been in short supply as well. And of course, a lot of people can't necessarily do work from home here in Qatar, people at school as well. So there is still availability, and there is the chance here for people to queue up and get tickets on the day, because this is a really unusual World Cup. All 8 stadiums are basically centred around the capital, Doha. You can get between all the stadiums fairly quickly. So for some fans, potentially, they can even get 2 matches in a single day here.
And a thought on David Beckham. I've seen him in one of those posh boxes watching, I'm guessing, the opening game. A lot of controversy around him taking the money from the Qataris, and a comedian back here in the UK even shredding £10,000 as a result.
Yeah, David Beckham's been the front man of Qatar in recent months. He's an ambassador for the country, yet he's not taking any questions about the country, about why he's signed up, or indeed about the concerns particularly raised by LGBT groups about him endorsing a country where same-sex relations are illegal. Now, we did hear from the FIFA president on Saturday, who insists that Qatar has said all fans would be welcome, but that isn't a strong enough message for LGBT groups, because the law still exists that does criminalise same-sex relations. And the face of the World Cup is David Beckham, who is being seen out and around in Doha, at fan zones, at some activities promoting the country, and indeed at that first game as well. But as of yet, we've not had the chance to put any questions to him, which we'll certainly be trying to.
I've got one or two that you could add to the list if you do manage to track him down. For now, thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. You've probably got a view, haven't you? Do you think that it's an outrage that an former England footballer is representing a country like Qatar, where those that are openly gay are beaten by the state? Or do you think that football transcends any form of politics, and we should be putting that to one side and just concentrating on what's happening on the pitch? Let us know your thoughts. You can tweet me directly if you would like to, at Kay Burley. We'll share some of those tweets with our viewers a bit later on. And despite the controversies, the World Cup began last night with a rather flashy opening ceremony. There you go, lots of fireworks. It featured Morgan Freeman, Jungkook from boy band BTS, and hundreds of performers, all topped off with this impressive fireworks display lighting up the night sky over Doha. And the tournament is the topic of discussion on the Great Debate tonight. You can join in by being part of the virtual audience. We'll be asking, is Qatar's World Cup an own goal for football? That's 9 o'clock tonight on Sky News. Still to come this morning, though, following confirmation that a man staying at the Manston Migrant Processing Centre in Kent has died in hospital. Speaking to the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick. That's coming up later this hour. Also joined by the head of the CBI, that's the Confederation of British Industry, Tony Danker, as he prepares to tell the CBI conference the government should use immigration to help boost economic growth. And Labour's Shadow Treasury Minister Tulip Siddiq will be with me soon after 8 o'clock. Also, we've got the drummer from Blair on the programme as they announce a big date at Wembley Arena. Shingi's here, as you can see. Good morning to you. Talk to me about Shamima Begum. Now, a lot of our viewers will know who she is. She would have been known as the IS bride. Why is she in the news again today?
Yes, so today she begins an appeal to have her British citizenship returned. That is off the back of a long legal battle in which she left the UK. Many people remember. She left her home in Bethnal Green, East London, to join Islamic State.
With two other girls.
Two other girls at the age of just 15. And then she re-emerged. She was found in 2019, heavily pregnant in a Syrian detention camp. The then Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, revoked her citizenship on what he called security grounds, and that kicked off this legal fight in which she has tried to have it returned. The Supreme Court initially told her she could not return to the UK to have that appeal. Today, an appeal hearing begins, and I think one of the most interesting elements here is the fact that there has been revelations that emerged this year in a book about the Five Eyes Spy Alliance, about the fact that a Canadian spy acting as a double agent allegedly smuggled her into the country from Turkey. That will form the basis of the defence her lawyers make. They're going to say that the UK government at the time revoked her citizenship, not knowing that she had been groomed and that she had been taken into the country.
So she's saying that she was child trafficked?
Exactly. She's saying she was child trafficked.
Where is she at the moment? She's still in northern Syria. She's not allowed back into the UK.
Not allowed in the UK, still in that camp in northern Syria. And she's done a number of interviews since she was found in 2019 in which she said things like, you know, I was effectively a housewife, that I didn't encourage people to join IS and that I am of no danger, I wasn't grooming anyone. So again, I suppose all of that will make part of her lawyer's defence today too.
And the other two girls are thought to be dead.
Yes.
This is going to take, what, 5 days or so, this case?
Absolutely. It's in a special immigration hearing today, which starts today and it goes on for 5 days. And I'm sure that we'll hear the UK government double down on their position, which is that she still poses a danger to people here and she still poses a threat.
OK, we'll see what happens. For now, thanks so much indeed. Thanks a lot. Let's tell you about other news, should we? And a man has been arrested on suspicion of murder after two young girls, aged 3 and 1, were killed in a fire in Nottingham. Their mother remains in a very critical condition. Becky has more for us in Nottingham this morning. Morning, Becky.
Good morning. Well, this morning, the 31-year-old man, who we're told comes from this Clifton area in Nottingham, is in police custody. He's been arrested on suspicion of murder and of attempted murder after two young girls, aged just 3 and 1, died in a fire in the flat here behind me. Now, you can probably make out the blackened windows of the first floor flat. Neighbours here have told me that they were woken around 3 o'clock yesterday morning to see smoke billowing out of that flat. The fire brigade were here, so were the police, and they watched in horror as these 2 young girls were carried out by emergency workers. Now I'm told that neighbours saw those girls being given CPR here on the street before they were taken to hospital, but very sadly their lives couldn't be saved. Now, their mother was also in the flat. She was also rescued, but she remains critically ill in hospital. Police announced really quite soon after this fire that they were treating this as a murder investigation. They said that's because their initial investigations had led them to conclude that this fire had been started deliberately. That has just added to the shock of people here. And officers are keen to say that although they've made an arrest, this investigation is still very much in its early stages. They'd really like any CCTV, any dash cam footage, or to speak to anyone who was in the area at the time who might be able to help with their investigation.
OK, thank you. Looking at some of today's other headlines for you now, and the Ukrainian president says Russian forces are pounding Ukrainian positions with artillery fire. In the eastern Donetsk region alone, Mr. Zelensky says almost 400 shelling incidents were recorded. He's also stressed that Ukraine wants peace but needs support to restore it.
I will say right away that the Ukrainian formula of peace is perceived in the world extremely positively. It is quite constructive and realistic, unlike the empty and false Russian rhetoric about their alleged readiness for some negotiations. We will do everything for the world to accept the Ukrainian formula of peace. Several important international addresses will be held next week, and we are deeply preparing.
The rapper Kanye West has returned to Twitter 6 weeks after his account was blocked for anti-Semitic posting. He first sent a tweet saying, testing, testing, seeing if my Twitter is unblocked. And he then sent a one-word tweet, shalom, a Hebrew word often translated as peace, but also used as a greeting or farewell. Legislation set to be introduced today to push back the deadline to form an executive in Northern Ireland. There's been no functioning government in Stormont since the last Assembly elections in May, with the DUP refusing to restore power sharing unless the Northern Ireland Protocol is scrapped. A new report has found black people experiencing racial discrimination are at greater risk of homelessness. Researchers said it reveals the shocking extent of disparities in homelessness risks between some minority ethnic communities and white people living in the UK. Black people subjected to discrimination are almost 50% more likely to be at risk of experiencing homelessness.
We see this report as a wake-up call to a problem that hasn't received enough attention. The situation we found is not very different from what it was 15 years ago, and it is shocking that black people in Britain, in England today, are 3.5 times more likely to be applying to their council as homeless. If you go to the capital of London, it's 5 times more likely.
China's announced more deaths, COVID deaths, a day after it reported its first death for 6 months. Tough restrictions are being imposed across the country as it battles rising cases. Helen Smith is in the southern city of Guizhou, and she brings us... actually, there's been a 5-day lockdown there, starting from today.
Well, the situation in Guangzhou is getting worse, as it is across China. In the last couple of days, yesterday and today, a total of 3 deaths have now been officially announced by the Chinese. It's really notable because no deaths at all from COVID-19 have been announced for 6 months. The last time any deaths at all were recorded were back in May when there was a big wave. And it really feels that probably tomorrow, cases of COVID-19 in this country are going to reach the highest level they have ever been at any point in the 3 years that we have been experiencing this pandemic, and China's been experiencing this pandemic. It's a big symbolic moment. Look, I want to show you where we are. We're in the city of Guangzhou. It's the epicenter of the outbreak. And where I am right now, up against this big blue barrier, This is the epicentre of the epicentre. Beyond this is the main area of Haiju district that is under strict lockdown at the moment. People in this district are being asked to stay inside. They're allowed to go out just to buy food from a grocery store, but nothing else. No businesses, no shops, no going to the office, anything like that. And they've been in this situation for a number of weeks now. And we've been up and down this barrier today, and there are people who have been popping their heads over the top, family members coming along to hand people things over this barrier because it's a very strict sense of lockdown. But what is so interesting in China is that there's a real dichotomy. On the one hand, at the moment, local governments are being told to keep COVID numbers at zero, as they have been throughout the pandemic. On the other hand, they had been asked by central government to try and optimise the response. That really meant targeting it a bit more, trying to be a bit less blanket, a bit less sort of hardcore, if you like, about lockdowns. The problem is that cases have continued to rise, and that doesn't feel like it's worked. And over just the last 24 hours or so, there's a sense that in a number of Chinese cities, local governments are resorting to what feels like an old playbook.
Well, to the US now, and this story is almost unbelievable. A mum has heard her late daughter's heart beating inside the chest of the man who received it in a transplant. Here we go. Amber Morgan's daughter, Andriona, died at the age of 20 after suffering from asthma. 68-year-old Tom Johnson had suffered with a weak heart since childhood, and doctors decided he needed a transplant. 4 years on from his operation, Miss Morgan was able to listen to her daughter's heart beat again in Mr. Johnson's chest. She said it was almost like getting to hug her again. It's lovely. Quick look at the weather.
Anticipation is rising, and so is the atmosphere. Are you ready? The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Oh, it's going to be a bit ropey this week. Conditions changeable. Showers, longer spells of rain, strong winds at times. Temperatures picking up by a degree or so on current values.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
And some more pictures that have caught our eye today for you. Here we go. An exciting picture of yesterday's opening ceremony from the Qatar Football World Cup. As you can see, people performed with mascots from previous tournaments. You can't really see, can you? Anyway, that's what they were doing. Qatar and Ecuador. I think it was a loss, wasn't it, for Qatar? 2-0 Ecuador in the first half, actually. Here's a general view of the annual Association of Jewish Ex-Servicemen and Women parading at the cenotaph. An elderly ex-serviceman gently laying a commemorative poppy wreath while others quietly paid their respects. And guess who's coming to town a bit earlier than usual? A group of Santa Claus performers are posing for a group of photos in Bavaria. Don't look like Santa Claus to me. The Augsburg agency provides Santas to different companies during the Christmas season. As we all know, there is only one Father Christmas. These are all fakes. Hello again, welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Pleased to say that the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, is joining us now. Good morning to you. Thanks.
Good morning, Kay.
So much to talk about, so little time to do it. Let's go straight into Shamima Begum, should we? She's the IS bride. She wants to be a Brit again. Why won't we let her?
Well, it's difficult for me to comment, I'm afraid, Kay, because we're waiting for the court's judgment later today. Once we hear that, then I'm happy to come on your programme and speak to you. But I do think as a fundamental principle, there will be cases, rare cases, but there will be cases where people do things and make choices which undermine the UK interest to such an extent that it is right for the Home Secretary to have the power to remove their passport. We'll have to see whether the court ultimately supports the decision of the former Home Secretary to do that in this case.
Is there ever room to reconsider, though, when teenagers make bad mistakes?
Well, I think you should always have an open mind, but it depends on the scale of the mistake and the harm that that individual did or could have done to UK interests abroad. But as I say, I don't want to comment too much on this case, if that's OK, because we'll find out later today what the court's decision was.
Something you might want to talk about is Brexit. Are we doing Swiss-style Brexit?
No, we're not. We have a settled position. There was a long debate, as you well recall, and there were respectable arguments on both sides as to the degree of relationship that we had with the European Union, but we chose one in 2019 and 2020 when Boris Johnson signed the deal with the European Union, which was very clear. There wouldn't be jurisdiction of European judges in the UK, we wouldn't be paying money to the European Union, and there wouldn't be freedom of movement. And those fundamental principles are the ones that will govern our relationship going forward. So I don't know where the story came from in the Sunday papers. It's not one that we recognise, and we're going to stick with the relationship that we've secured. That doesn't mean that we're not interested in improving our trading relations with the European Union, or indeed, in my sphere, our security and migration partnership with the European Union, as you saw with the deal that we were able to strike with the French recently. But we're not going to reopen the discussions that we had a few years ago. We have a settled view, and we're moving forwards on that basis.
So could we potentially restart payments to the EU in order to improve that trade deal?
No, we've no intention of doing that. As I said, money, free movement, jurisdiction of European judges, these are really important things that were discussed at length within the Conservative Party, within the country a few years ago. We chose our position. I think it's broadly the right one because we did that for a reason. We did that so that the UK, the fifth largest economy in the world, wasn't subject to foreign judges or rules and regulations coming out of the European Union and could embrace the opportunities that came with Brexit. And you heard in the budget the Chancellor saying that we would be doing that in crucial areas for the British economy, like life sciences, like green technologies, like advanced manufacturing and financial services. And that really should be our focus right now. How do you grow the British economy and ensure that we are one of the most innovative countries in the world, using our ability to set our own laws at a faster pace and in a smarter way than a big trading bloc like the European Union is able to do.
So the head of the CBI says in order to improve growth, we need to increase migration.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. We listen to the business community, obviously, and we're aware of certain skills shortages, and we want a pragmatic, sensible relationship with business. You see that in some of the visas that we've established in recent years, like the health and social care visa, for example, that's enabled thousands of doctors and nurses and care workers to come into the country to help support the NHS. But overall, our ambition is to reduce net migration. We think that's what the British public want. That was one of the driving forces in the vote to leave the European Union back in 2016. And it's simply not true to say that we've adopted a sort of closed-door approach since then. In fact, last year, 300,000 work visas were issued for people to come into this country. They were issued to people who had a certain living standard, so they could look after themselves and not rely too heavily on the state. And they're issued to people who are working in what we call shortage occupations. I think that's the right approach, rather than drawing on lower-skilled workers. If I was a business manager, I would be looking to the British workforce in the first instance, seeing how I could get local people into my business, train them up, skill them to do the job. And remember, Kay, there are 5 million economically inactive people in this country, and the government's first duty is to help as many of them as possible into the workforce.
Do you listen to the British people?
I hope so. That's my job as a politician.
OK, 54% say that Brexit was a mistake.
Well, that's a poll that you're referring to there, and polls obviously do come and go. The most important vote was the one that happened back in 2016 when the public voted to leave the European Union. I don't think if you asked people, would you like to go through the disruption and the challenges that happened when we were debating when and how to leave the European Union all over again, my priority now as a member of the government is to help this country through a cost of living crisis, ensure that we grow the economy, and to tackle big issues like the migrant crisis in the Channel, like public services.
I'm glad you brought that up. What's going on with this chap that died at Manston?
Well, it was very sad, obviously, as anybody's death was. But as far as we know, and it's now a matter for the coroner and the independent investigator called the IOPC, who the Home Office have referred the case to, as far as we know, this is an individual who got unwell on arrival in the UK, or was unwell before he arrived in. Not because of the conditions at Manston. Well, the coroner will investigate that, and so I don't want to prejudge that. But from what we know today, he certainly did not have an infectious disease like diphtheria, as has been suggested in the press.
OK. Talk to me about our Ishak, 2 years old. His family complain about mould even before he's born. and he dies because of mould in his housing association home. That was under your watch. How could that happen?
Yeah, I think it's a desperately sad case, and it shows that some social housing, and in fact it's not related to social housing because the evidence suggests that the private rental sector actually has, on average, lower standards than the social rented sector. So housing more generally, there are unfortunately far too many properties in this country that don't meet a decent standard. We've done a number of things in recent years to try to tackle that. Hopefully the most important one will be creating a new regulator for social housing. I established that as Housing Secretary. It's now being legislated for by my successor, Michael Gove, in the House of Commons. That will ensure that residents' voices are heard, because one of the things we learnt, for example, in the Grenfell tragedy, was that too many people who live in social housing feel ignored, as if they don't matter, and their social housing providers...
Why has it taken 2 years? Why has it taken so long?
Well, we've established a regulator, we've established an entire new regulatory regime, which is all about ensuring that people who are residents in social housing, council housing or housing associations can actually have their voices heard and their complaints properly investigated.
Well, we're almost out of time, but I've been looking at some of the big earners in the paper this morning. Former boss of Anchor Housing, £592,000. Should these people be getting that sort of
No,
money?
I don't think they should be. And when I was Housing Secretary, I called that out repeatedly. Housing associations, I think in some cases, have moved away from their charitable and social purposes and have become too large, not sufficiently focused on the interests and needs of the resident where it began. And as you say, some of the executive pay is off the charts. That needs to change. Michael Gove, I think this week, has written to all the social housing providers in the country, raising that case and saying that they need to improve standards and refocus on where social housing began, which was providing decent quality housing to people who are more vulnerable in society, rather than becoming large businesses that are out of touch.
We're out of time, but I'm sure you'll be watching the England game later on. How will you feel if they take the knee?
I'm fine with that. I think that that's a choice for Harry Kane and the team, as indeed for Wales as well. These are their choices. It's not for the government to tell them what to do. And I think when you're playing in a country like Qatar, which does have different standards in the way it treats, for example, the LGBTQ community, it's perfectly legitimate for the England or Welsh team to make that stand.
It's amazing to talk to you. It's been too long. Thanks
Nice
for coming in.
too,
Much
Kate.
appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Jenrick. Thank you. Let's bring in the head of the CBI, should we actually? Tony Danker, expected to say the government should end arguments over Brexit and use immigration to solve worker shortages. Hello to you. Thanks for joining us on the programme, Mr. Danker. We've just been hearing from the government. They disagree with you. What would you say in response?
Yeah, look, I think the problem the government have is we really don't know how we're going to get growth going in the economy, right? The government has to stop spending money, so it can't do tax cuts, it can't do spending increases. The Bank of England have to put up interest rates. So where's the momentum for growth? That's why you have to look at things like immigration or planning or regulation. As to Rob Jenrick's point about immigration, look, this should be a very simple system. What are the jobs we need to fill? Number one. Number two, have we got British workers to fill them? And number three, if we don't, let's use immigration on a fixed term basis, just fixed term visas, to plug the gaps until British workers are ready to do the jobs. That's not how our immigration system works today. And that's why it's not helping us with our growth problem.
You want to hear from the Prime Minister today, then?
Well, what I want to hear from the Prime Minister today is what I call part two of the autumn statement, right? The autumn statement was all about stabilising the markets after the mini budget. It was all about trying to fight inflation. What it wasn't about is how the economy is going to grow again. It wasn't about how we're going to end the recession after a year and start to get Britain growing again. I'm hoping we're going to hear some new ideas from the Prime Minister about how that's going to happen.
Although you did previously welcome Liz Truss's mini budget, didn't you? Did you not foresee the dangers of what was coming down the pike with that one?
Well, what we welcomed was the part of the mini budget that admitted we needed to do these things, right? In pieces that were not really noticed by the media, Liz Truss said, listen, we need to do more on immigration. We need to do more on planning. We need to do more on regulation because we have to get the economy growing. The mistake that she made, which we have spoken out against, was the belief that you can get growth going overnight just by cutting everybody's taxes. That isn't realistic, right? We need to think of ways to get businesses who are coming here today to say, do you know what? I am going to invest next year. And I know there's some tough times around, but I still think there's growth and the government have got my back. And there's some momentum that this recession is just going to be shallow. That's the spirit and the practicalities that we want to hear from the Prime Minister today.
Was it right for Liz Truss to step down when she did?
Yes. Look, I think it was inevitable. Look, we were always going to have to pay down debt, weren't we? We built up 450 billion of debt from COVID. We're building up 100 billion pounds more from the energy support. We were always going to have to pay it down. What happened with the mini budget, however, is the government lost control of the timing. And so Jeremy Hunt really had no alternative but to be, pretty brutal last week and to go far and fast to cut essentially the gap in the public finances. We wouldn't have had to go that far and fast if we'd retained control of the timing. And that's the tragedy, really, of the mini budget.
Do you agree with when the Chancellor stood up at the dispatch box and says that we are now in recession? And if so, what does that mean for your members? You say a shallow recession, but we don't know, do we?
No, you're right. We don't know. And the government, the OBR said it would be, only last a year. The Bank of England said it might last 2. There is everything to play for. And, Kay, I've been talking to lots of firms in the last 2 or 3 weeks. They're all doing their budgets for 2023. And do you know what they say? They say, I think I am going to grow, but everybody tells me there's going to be a recession. And I can see that energy support's going to come to an end. So they are making decisions right now about whether to invest next year or whether to cut. And I do think, therefore, that our conference today, with the Prime Minister showing up, and I'll be trying to boost the argument for growth, I think it's really important we get a bit of positive momentum to show that there's still incentives to invest in our economy. Look, that's not going to turn around growth overnight, but it will mean that this time next year, we'll be talking about coming out of recession.
How do you feel about a Labour government?
Well, we're going to hear from Keir Starmer tomorrow. And what will be interesting to hear from Keir is, look, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have a bold plan to invest in order to get growth. The question is, can we still afford it, right? Jeremy Hunt suggested last week that there wasn't very much money at all, if any, to invest in growth. So I think the challenge for the Labour Party is going to be, can they deliver on that growth plan? Now, if they can work out fresh ways to get growing, then we'll definitely welcome that.
That was a very diplomatic answer.
Well, it's my conference. I want everybody to come and be happy, Kay. I'm not going to annoy politicians, not until after they've spoken.
We'll talk to you again after that then. It's good to see you. Thank you.
See you soon, Kay.
Thanks a lot. Tamara's here. Hi, morning.
Morning, Kay. Big storm in the newspapers over the weekend over this suggestion that the government may be looking at closer ties with the EU, a Swiss-style Brexit arrangement. If you don't know, the Swiss are not in the EU, but they have access to the single market, which they pay for, and in return, they accept free movement and they accept EU standards in a number of different areas. So it was an idea that was debated during the many years of debate about Brexit, but rejected by Boris Johnson in favour of the much tougher agreement that we have now. Now, the government, Downing Street, have categorically denied that they are looking at this, but the Sunday Times say that they were told it at a very high level, that it's being looked at, not to happen in a year's time, but more like in a decade's time. And you can see why when you hear business leaders like Tony Danker representing the CBI saying a lot of sectors are really suffering with workforce shortages, whether it's social care in the NHS or hospitality. They are not getting the people in who they used to and finding it a real struggle. I mean, Tony Danker is going to be saying in his speech later today that the only thing that's contributed to economic growth this year has been migration, and it needs to increase. So when you've got business leaders saying that, you wonder whether behind the scenes the government are at least entertaining how they could have closer ties with the EU. But of course, to Brexiteers who fought very hard for the form of Brexit we've got now, of course, that's going to be infuriating and is going to reopen those debates that many people thought were behind us.
OK. The IS bride, what's going on there?
So you remember that Sajid Javid, back when he was Home Secretary, stripped Shamima Begum, who's one of those 3 girls from East London, went to join IS in Syria. She was the one who was discovered in this refugee camp. He stripped her of her British citizenship. She's not been able to come back to the UK, and she's been mounting this long legal case. They did it on the basis that she was entitled to Bangladeshi citizenship, although she doesn't actually have it. She's entitled to it. Her legal team have been saying that this is not the right thing to do. I believe there are other people who've been in a similar situation, and it'd be very interesting to see whether the government managed to succeed with that course of action today, because of course it would have implications for others as well.
Indeed so, and we did hear from the Minister saying he would keep an open mind. So that's much more
interesting that he didn't say we are going full steam ahead with trying to strip her and others of their citizenship, which is what Sajid Javid said when this initially happened. I mean, people in government said you haven't seen all the evidence that we've seen about what was really going on there. This is a case that really does divide opinion, but she seems to have gone on a journey since she was first discovered.
OK, for now. Tomorrow, thank you. Tomorrow's take at 9 o'clock, of course. Looking at the papers for you this morning, leading with a warning from Tory Eurosceptics to the Prime Minister not to strike a Swiss-style trade deal with the EU. Switzerland has access to the single market but allows free movement of people and pays money into the EU. Same lead story in the Mail with the headline, "Don't betray us on Brexit." The Express too says there's fury at any suggestion the UK may go soft on Brexit. FT looks at the end of the COP27 climate summit and describes the result as discord, even though an agreement was reached on helping poorer countries. Quick look at The Guardian. Experts fear the deal still leaves the world on the brink of catastrophe. Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News Monday morning. England kick off at 1 o'clock today in the World Cup in their game against Iran. And then a little bit later on this evening, Wales will be playing the United States. More on that to come shortly. Before that, though, let me tell you about foreign ministers from the G7 group of major industrialised nations. They've called on the UN to take a significant response to the latest North Korean missile launches. What's going on? Former military advisor to the US government, Charlie Cooper, is with us. Hi, Charlie. It's good to see you. What do you think is going on?
Well, honestly, Kay, it's hard to know. North Korea is a mystery to many of us, not just in the West, but frankly, even to their allies in the East, including China. And they've been flouting United Nations resolutions since the beginning of time, or as long as we can remember, oftentimes around their missile capability and their nuclear programs. So the call from the G7 to get the UN more involved, it's not entirely clear what good it would do. It does seem from those of us who pay a lot of attention to North Korea that this is a bit of a cry for attention. In the last couple of months, they've been pushed out of the headlines, replaced by China-Taiwan tensions, the uprisings in Iran, the Ukrainian war has been going on now since March. And North Korea hasn't gotten the attention that it has sort of as a bit of a toddler in the international community, and they're striving for people to pay attention and hopefully get some sort of sanctions relief or give them leverage in a negotiation with the United Nations. It's not clear that it will work this time because it hasn't in the past.
Quite a dramatic way to get attention, high stakes, not least because the US responded by sending bombers.
Yeah. It's not known really what their thinking is, and it's not clear how the North Koreans would actually get attention otherwise. They have a very crippled economy. Much of their state lives in near prison camps or prison camps themselves. They're isolated from the international community and have been for decades. The military power that they want and that they've been building over that long period of time is really the only way they have of getting any attention. You'll notice that over the last couple of weeks, they've ratcheted up the number of missiles they've launched, something like 10, 20-fold over anything that they've done in past years. So this is certainly more extreme than it has been in the past. You'll also notice that Kim Jong-un brought his sister to an event. Anytime that a dictator, and certainly in North Korea, appears with certain people, it's trying to send a message. What are they trying to accomplish now with this particular overture to the West? It's not clear. Those of us who look at it can only anticipate that what they're looking to do is get more on the radar and hope that they can negotiate for lighter sanctions and potentially some food relief in particular, as they're a very impoverished country.
Yeah, firing missiles over Japan, causing all sorts of anxiety in that Asian country. How smart is that?
Well, the West doesn't think it's very smart. It's hard to know what is different now other than the frequency of what they're doing. The ICBMs that were launched just the other day are quite interesting because this is the first time that North Korea has launched a missile capable of hitting any U.S. city. That is a ratcheting up of what's been going on. But whether or not it's smart in the Western mind, or frankly, even in most of the world, is different than the North Korean calculus. As such an isolated state, as such a mysterious state, the ways in which they think about foreign policy, the ways in which they think about diplomacy and statecraft is completely different than the way that we in the United States or you in the United Kingdom think of it. So trying to interpret what they're doing becomes extremely difficult.
How big a nuclear threat is North Korea?
We don't really know. We know that they have conducted several nuclear tests in the past. Certain experts are predicting they might be coming up with their 7th attempt some point before the year end. Their missile capability is strengthening by the day. So in that sense, they are a real threat. They do have increasing ability to deliver warheads over the course of time. What we don't know, however, is whether or not they're willing to use it. Even in their own way of looking at the world and this saber rattling, it's not clear that they would be interested in initiating any sort of nuclear strike because of it would be such a self-defeating move on their part to stoke the international community into a full-scale nuclear war.
What's your prediction, Charlie, on what might happen next?
I ultimately don't think that they use those weapons. I do think there is a scary trend that began with Vladimir Putin just months ago, rattling the nuclear saber in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. I worry that there's a bit of a taboo that's beginning to fall away, that what was previously considered inconceivable to the international community, the use of nuclear weapons, is now being seen by certain actors, including rogue actors like North Korea, as on the table in a way that it didn't used to be. And that becomes worrisome. But I don't think we're close to anything happening in the near future.
And just a final thought before I let you go, Charlie, on the dictator dynasty. We have seen the leader's daughter. Why are we seeing her now, do you think?
It's very hard to tell. Kim Jong-un is only 38 years old. And we tend to think of that as very young. Obviously, it is very young, but he has been ill in the past. There was a lot of speculation over the course of this summer and over the course of the spring when he was out of the public eye for a long period of time that something might be wrong, something far more than what would be typical for a 38-year-old. The messages that he is trying to send by showing that his sister could be next in line, I think is a signal that we need to interpret strongly, that him and his family have no interest or plans to give up power, and that any succession that would happen in North Korea would not be a handoff to a different part of the country, either the military or the diplomatic establishment, but would remain firmly in the family's hands. And I think we have to take that seriously.
OK, time for bed for you. Thanks for staying up for us.
Thank you, Kay.
Thanks a lot.